The Hands That Held Us. A story of two families, one grandmother, and the difference between presence and expectation. Margaret Hale had always lived a life stitched together by simplicity, kindness, and resilience. She was the kind of woman who believed in handwritten thank you notes, folding laundry while humming old jazz tunes, and never going to bed with dishes in the sink. After her husband Robert passed away, peacefully, yet far too early for her heart to accept, she remained in the home they had built together, a two-story brick house with sun-yellow shutters and a porch swing that creaked like it knew secrets. She had two children, Elaine and James, and they couldn't have turned out more differently. Elaine was the firstborn. From a young age, she was drawn to structure, performance, and prestige. Margaret remembered how Elaine would organize her dolls by profession, giving each one a backstory and an Ivy League education. She had a hunger for upward mobility, something Margaret admired but never fully understood. Elaine studied business at a prestigious university, married Thomas, a polished, sharply dressed man who could negotiate a contract over breakfast and still make his 10 o'clock tea time, and settled into a fast-paced, upward-climbing life in the suburbs. Elaine and Thomas had 3 children, Madeline, Ben, and Chloe. From the outside, their family life looked like a catalog spread, matching Christmas pajamas, Instagram-perfect vacations, and meticulously planned birthday parties complete with gourmet cupcakes and custom photo booths. But inside, everything was built on routine, performance, and social standing. Elaine didn't outright reject Margaret's presence, but there was always a polite distance. "I just don't want to burden you, Mom," Elaine would say. "The kids are used to Thomas's parents. They have a pool, they speak French with Madeline, it's just easier." Margaret smiled and nodded. But it always hurt. She would sit quietly in the pew during the kids' school plays, clapping politely as they rushed past her afterward toward their other grandparents, who brought flowers and posed for pictures. At family dinners, she'd be placed at the end of the table, served last, her stories gently interrupted by someone pulling out their phone. And still, she loved them. Quietly. Unconditionally. James, by contrast, had always been the slower, steadier soul. As a boy, he spent hours helping his father in the garage, disassembling clocks just to see if he could put them back together. He didn't care for grades as much as he cared for understanding. He went to trade school, became a mechanic, and opened a small shop just outside of town. He married Lily, a woman with wild curls and a voice like warm honey. A librarian by profession, Lily was both gentle and strong. A woman who carried tragedy on her shoulders with grace after losing her parents in a car crash just weeks before Grace was born. James and Lily had 2 children, Noah and Grace. They lived in a weathered house on Maple Lane with a garden full of tomatoes, hand-sewn curtains, and a chalkboard by the fridge for reminders and silly quotes. There were no extravagant vacations, no private tutors, but there was joy, loud, messy, affectionate joy. And from the moment the children were born, Margaret became an inseparable part of their lives. She held Noah the night he came home from the hospital, humming lullabies and letting Lily rest. She helped potty train Grace, read them bedtime stories, and taught them how to bake banana bread without overmashing the bananas. Her old piano, long dormant, came to life again when Noah started lessons. James and Lily welcomed her not out of duty, but love. They never asked her to spend beyond her means. When she took them to dinner, they ordered modestly or insisted on treating. They didn't want her money, they wanted her time. As years passed, the difference between the two families became more pronounced. Elaine's children grew into sharp, socially adept teens. Madeline joined the debate team, Ben captained his soccer team, and Chloe was already applying to elite arts academies by the age of 13. They were respectful, but distant. To them, Grandma Margaret was Mom's mom, a woman with old-fashioned clothes and a soft voice who gave them cards with neat cursive writing. They saw her a few times a year. During those visits, she'd smile warmly, bring gifts she thought were meaningful, and listen with pride to their stories about scholarships and school trips. But when she offered to help, Elaine would brush it off. "Don't worry, Mom, we've got it covered. Sylvia and Arthur are taking them skiing." Meanwhile, in James's household, Margaret was woven into the very fabric of daily life. She was there for science fairs, Halloween costumes, math homework, and scraped knees. She knew the names of Grace's stuffed animals and Noah's favorite late-night snack. She watched their favorite shows with them, even when she didn't understand what was happening, and laughed anyway. They called her just to chat. Texted her goodnight emojis. On Saturdays, she joined them for pancakes and stories at the breakfast table, where they shared highs and lows of the week and passed the syrup like communion. Then the shift began. Arthur began to forget names. Then appointments. Then faces. Sylvia tried to cover for him, but the burden was too much. Elaine, stressed and juggling too much already, reached out to Margaret for help, something she hadn't done in over a decade. "I know this is sudden, but could you watch the kids this week? Just until we figure out what's going on with Thomas's parents." Margaret, who had quietly hoped for years that Elaine would see her as more than an emergency contact, said yes without hesitation. And so began a new chapter. Elaine's children were older now, too old to be watched, really. But Margaret helped where she could. Drove them to appointments, sat through rehearsals, took them to dinner. But unlike James's children, who still reached for her hand or thanked her for her time, these teenagers expected things. When she took them out, they ordered the most expensive items on the menu. They barely said thank you. Elaine brushed it off as just how teens are, but it wore on Margaret. She kept showing up, of course. She always did. As Margaret aged into her late 70s, her health declined, slowly, then steadily. It was James who noticed first. The forgotten stove burners. The occasional confusion in conversation. Lily accompanied her to the doctor, where the early signs of dementia were confirmed. They reorganized her medication, installed a fall detection device in her home, and quietly rearranged their schedules to ensure someone was always nearby. Elaine, when told, was polite but distant. "I'll visit soon," she said. "The kids have finals. Thomas is traveling." James never asked for her help. He didn't want to guilt her into caring. He just wanted her to care. One winter night, Margaret went to sleep in her armchair with a quilt around her legs and a book in her lap. And she never woke up. Her funeral was held on a rainy Thursday. The church was full of people whose lives she had touched, students she'd helped learn to read, families she'd baked for after surgeries, neighbors she'd sat with during hard times. Elaine's eulogy was short. "She was a kind woman," she said, standing stiffly at the podium. "She helped us when we needed it. We're grateful. She'll be missed." James spoke without notes. "My mother lived with her heart open. She loved quietly but deeply. She never kept score. She gave of herself because that's who she was. And for those of us lucky enough to be truly seen by her, we know, she was the anchor, the storyteller, the warmth in every room. She didn't want praise, she just wanted to be part of your life." There wasn't a dry eye when he sat down. After the funeral, the air between the two families thickened, not with grief, but with something sharper, colder. Tension. It began with the reading of Margaret's will, just 2 days after she was laid to rest. The room was quiet when the lawyer, a composed woman named Ms. Delaney, began to speak. They sat in Margaret's living room, a space now tinged with absence. The pale green walls still held the scent of her rosewater perfume, and the ticking clock on the mantel, which Margaret wound by hand every evening, now echoed in the silence like a slow metronome of finality. Elaine sat beside Thomas, her arms crossed, her expression tight but expectant. Madeline, Ben, and Chloe leaned on the armrests of the old couch, only half listening. James and Lily sat across from them, more somber, hands intertwined. Noah and Grace stood behind their parents, silent but attentive. The lawyer cleared her throat and began. "To my beloved daughter Elaine, I leave the locket your father gave me on our wedding day, and the photo album from our family vacations. To Thomas, I leave the silver cufflinks he admired at Christmas. To Madeline, Ben, and Chloe, I leave personal letters and the antique figurines from my shelf, each of which reminded me of them in some way. Elaine smiled tightly. She had expected this, sentimentality first. The bigger pieces would come next. Ms. Delaney continued. To my dear son James, and his wife Lily, I leave the house in which I lived for over 50 years. May it continue to be a place of warmth and love. To Noah and Grace, I leave my remaining financial assets, which include my savings account, pension remainder, and life insurance policy. These funds are to be split evenly between them, to help with their education and future. There was a long pause. Elaine blinked. She waited for more. But the lawyer only closed the folder and folded her hands. That's it? Elaine asked, eyes narrowing. That's the entire will? Ms. Delaney nodded. It was notarized and witnessed in full accordance with the law. Elaine's voice sharpened. She gave James the house? All the money? And we get, what, souvenirs? Thomas sat straighter, his consultant tone slipping in. I think there must be some sort of oversight. She wouldn't do that. Not to her daughter. Ms. Delaney remained firm. There is no oversight, Mr. Cartwright. Your mother-in-law was of sound mind when she made her decisions. She even had it revised last year, after her health diagnosis. Elaine's voice rose. She was being manipulated. She was vulnerable. Of course James got everything, he was always around, always in her ear. James flinched, then stood up, his voice calm but firm. Don't do that, Elaine. Don't rewrite what you chose not to see. I didn't have to manipulate her. I just showed up. Elaine shot up from her chair. Showed up? You think you're some saint because you spent time with her? We had things going on. 3 kids. 2 careers. And don't act like she didn't have help from us. You mean the help you only offered when your in-laws couldn't step in anymore? James's tone sharpened now, years of held-back frustration surfacing. She was desperate for your attention for decades. You only came around when it was convenient. Lily stood, stepping between them. Elaine, she wanted to be a part of your life. She offered so many times. But she wasn't fancy enough, wasn't impressive enough for your world. Elaine turned to her children. You see what they're saying? That we didn't love her? That we didn't care? Madeline looked down. Ben shifted uncomfortably. Chloe said nothing. Thomas cleared his throat. Perhaps we should all take a moment to process this before rushing to judgment. Don't pretend to be the peacemaker now, Lily said. You're upset you lost out on money. This isn't about grief, it's about control. Elaine's cheeks flushed. That house should have been mine. I grew up there. James laughed bitterly. You grew up there, yes. But you left it behind the moment you had something shinier. She lived in that house and died in that house, mostly alone, except when we were there. Elaine's voice cracked. You don't understand the pressure I was under. I had to keep up appearances, manage everything. I couldn't afford to be sentimental. You couldn't afford to be human, James snapped. That's the difference. The room fell into a cold silence. Margaret's ticking clock seemed to grow louder. Eventually, the lawyer gathered her things and excused herself, leaving the family to stew in the tension. Elaine turned to her husband and children, visibly fuming. We'll contest it, she hissed. She wasn't thinking straight. But Thomas shook his head. It won't hold. Everything was legal. We'd only drag her memory through the mud. Elaine looked as if she'd been slapped. So that's it? We just let them take everything? Noah stepped forward then, his voice surprisingly steady for someone his age. She didn't leave us everything. She gave us what she thought we'd earned. That's not theft. That's love returned. Elaine stared at him, shocked by the clarity and truth in his words. We never meant to hurt her, Madeline said softly. But maybe, we didn't do enough to help her, either. Ben nodded. Even Chloe, who had been silent the whole time, muttered, "She always smiled when she saw us. I just thought she'd always be there." James walked to the hallway and picked up an old photo, one of their mother with both children on her lap, laughing. He turned it toward Elaine. "You had your chance. Every phone call. Every birthday. Every Sunday she sat alone in that house. You had your chance." Elaine didn't say a word as James left the room with the photo tucked under his arm. In the weeks that followed, the families rarely spoke. Elaine tried, once or twice, to reach out, to ask for a reconsideration, maybe a compromise. But James declined. This wasn't about inheritance, he told her in a message she never replied to. It was about showing up. And in the end, she gave us what she thought each of us had shown her. Elaine began to see the truth everywhere, in old photos where Margaret sat alone at birthdays, in the hand-knitted scarves still folded in their drawers that the kids never wore, in the homemade cards from her mother that she had once tossed into a pile of mail and forgotten. And when she visited the house one last time, now officially James's, she stood on the porch where her mother used to swing. The wind rustled the curtains inside. She knocked, but no one answered. She hadn't called ahead. James was out. So she sat there for a long time, surrounded by the ghosts of chances not taken, listening to the wind chime that her mother had always loved. And for the first time, she cried, not just for the loss, but for all the quiet moments she had let slip through her fingers. Not because she hadn't been given enough, but because she hadn't given enough. And some things, once gone, can't be rewritten with money, or property, or protest. Only remembered, with regret.